This is Future Fork, a show that explores the world of food and the decisions we can make today that will shape our future. On the show, you'll hear from innovators in the food space. We'll have disruptive conversations with people from around the globe who are taking the lead on topics like food sustainability, ending world hunger, food security, and so much more. I'm your host, Paul Newnham. In this episode, we're talking to Asma Lateef, Chief of Policy and Impact right here at the SDG2 Advocacy Hub. She's not just a colleague, but she's a powerhouse of global policy expertise who's been changing the game in international development. We're diving into the behind-the-scenes work of tackling global hunger and bringing meaningful change in the world's most pressing challenges. You'll hear about the wild ride at the G20 in Rio, the insider secrets of global policy making, and how we're actually going to move the needle on sustainable development, all while sitting across the desk from each other. Let's get into it. Asma, welcome to the show.
Thank you. Great to be here.
So let's start. I'd love to hear you tell us a little bit about your role at the Hub and the work you do and what that involves.
So my official title is Chief of Policy and Advocacy Impact. What that means, I think, is doing some of the thinking around where the Hub can play a role in advancing policy ideas, policy alignment, policy recommendations. So we work with partners around key issues, all the key issues of SDG2, so food security, nutrition, smallholder livelihoods and productivity, climate adaptation, agricultural sustainability, and biodiversity. So we are looking at those issues and seeing the opportunities each year to advance towards those issues. And we work with our partners to develop policy recommendations, to advance policy ideas.
So what led you to this work and why would you say it's engaged? Because I sense a bit of energy from you on this work.
Well, I got into advocacy by accident. I got into working on food security issues by accident around 25 years ago. So initially focused very much on advocacy at the country level. I worked in the US context, engaged with US government officials, members of Congress on food security issues. And now at the Hub, I get to do this work more at the global level, which is really exciting, working with partners across sectors, including UN agencies and civil society and the private sector, the multilateral development banks. So it's great to work at that level, having worked more at the country context. These issues are, we're at a period where we have lost significant ground due to COVID, the ongoing impacts of climate change and conflict. And so there's an urgency around these issues. And it's wonderful to work with partners who are like-minded, who want to do something about, who share the same passion. And it's great to see coming out of this period of crisis, there's a renewed political commitment to addressing food insecurity and malnutrition. We've seen leadership in many places in response to the crisis, but I think there's a sense also now that food security, nutrition, food systems transformation can actually help address some of the underlying crises that we face at the global level, including the climate crisis. So I think we're at a time of the need for urgent response because the SDG deadline is upon us 5 years from now. And if we don't get ahead of the impact of climate change on our food systems, we are much more likely to fall further behind. So there's an urgency to not only make up for the ground we've lost over the last few years, but to get ahead of future climate impacts. And so positioning food systems transformation, agriculture, nutrition as being part of the solution to the climate crisis is really key building resilience in communities, especially amongst the poorest communities, is essential. Otherwise, we'll be constantly trying to catch up. And many of those communities are also food producers. The majority of the world's poor and malnourished still live in rural areas and depend on agriculture for their livelihoods. So, yeah, there's a lot of potential, but there's a lot of work to be done.
So we've just come from the G20 in Rio. How did you find your experience there?
It was an exciting moment. I haven't been to very many. Actually, I have been to one G20. It was the one in Pittsburgh during the last food price crisis, where the G20 under the US leadership launched a response to that food crisis and it was called the Global Agriculture and Food Security Program, GAFSP. So this was my second G20 in Rio, and it was exciting because it had been a long time since we had seen a G20 presidency really prioritize food security and nutrition. And Brazil has had a lot of experience with tackling food insecurity in their own context. Political will has been a key component to that, and President Lula, who's the current president of Brazil, in his previous administration, led a huge whole of government effort to address food insecurity and hunger in Brazil. And I think the Brazilians like to say Brazil left the hunger map during that first administration. And over the subsequent years, under different administrations in Brazil, Brazil lost ground. So now, with President Lula's administration back, they are rebuilding the systems that they had put in place, and they are seeing much success. So Brazil has a lot to offer, lessons learned to the rest of the world. And at the G20 leaders all launched together under Brazil's leadership a global alliance against hunger and poverty. And I think you've covered that in one of your previous interviews. So I won't go into much detail, but it is important. It's significant because the Global Alliance demonstrates political commitment. It provides alignment around a core set of policies that have worked, evidence-based policies that have worked. The goal is to improve coordination at the global level across stakeholders to help deliver these evidence-based policies in countries that are experiencing food insecurity and malnutrition. So there's a lot of promise. It just got launched. So the next phase really is implementation. And that's where advocacy efforts will need to focus in coming years to make sure that we are delivering against the promise.
And so, in terms of the next 12 months and delivering on that promise, what would you say should really be the focus around trying to ensure? I know South Africa is going to be taking on the G20. So, how are you seeing that play out?
There are multiple components, I think, to the next steps. Setting up an infrastructure to begin to do that coordination is key, and I think the G20 has a plan for that. Several regional hubs and a secretariat. So getting that up and running and beginning to do that work of connecting the financing with the needs at the country level and the technical know-how will be the role of that effort. The financing needs is really key. We can't do this without additional resources. There's a huge financing gap that the 2024 SOFI report outlined. And so, yes, there's a lot we can do with existing resources by aligning around evidence-based policies and by improving the way we coordinate. But we also need additional financing to be able to go to scale. And we're looking this week at the IDA 21 replenishment. IDA 21, as you know, is the fund for the poorest countries, the lowest income countries, housed at the World Bank. It's a concessional lending arm and provides grants as well. That could be a huge source of financing for the Global Alliance. The World Bank has already indicated its eagerness, actually, to align behind the Global Alliance, which is great. So a strong IDA replenishment will be key. Next year, we've got the African Development Fund replenishment as well. That's another opportunity. So there's implementation, financing, and then the third piece is really accountability. And that's where I think the South African G20 and subsequent G20s can really play a role in monitoring the implementation, seeing where progress is being made, looking at where the challenges are and trying to fix those challenges, and holding all stakeholders, including themselves, accountable to this vision of the Global Alliance. So South Africa has already thankfully said food security is going to be one of the top agenda items for the South African presidency. It would be great to see them build on the momentum of the G20 and continue to shape the Global Alliance in a way that it can be as effective a tool as possible, because really it is a tool and all of us have to work to improve it. At the moment, it's a really good idea that's been launched, but it's incumbent on all of us to stay focused and to use this political leadership and to make sure that we're making it as an effective tool as possible.
And do you see any major challenges to it succeeding?
I mentioned the Pittsburgh G20 that I attended. There was a lot of promise with GAFSB, and GAFSB has done tremendous good with the resources that it was given. But the original vision of GAFSB was much bigger. And so I think a lesson learned from that experience is we launched it. And when I say we, I mean the international community launched it. And then I guess felt the job was done. And we found ourselves again in another food crisis when perhaps GAFSB, if we had continued to build on that, could have prevented. That's a hypothetical. We can't go back and change history. But I think the lesson there is really about staying focused and making sure that the mechanism that we've put into place to improve alignment, coordination, and go to scale, help countries scale up systems that will build resilience, prevent food crises, and accelerate progress are strengthened. And we've got 5 years to do it. We need to stay focused and commit know-how, resources, effort, and commit to put institutional egos aside and work together.
So in 2025, how would you see the broader sector working better together? What would excite you to see in terms of us working together? You've mentioned egos just now. What else is there that you would see in terms of us working together better?
It's really exciting that the Global Alliance has just been launched just as the African Union is about to update its own comprehensive agricultural development plan, CADP, the Comprehensive African Agriculture Development Program. It's in its third iteration of being updated for the challenges that we face now and taking a food systems approach. That will be launched in January in Kampala. So this is the post-Malabo process that will now be approved by the African Union. And I think it'll be known as the Kampala Declaration once that's happened. So that signifies real alignment across the African continent around the key priorities for food security, agriculture, nutrition, food systems transformation. And it offers an opportunity for everyone else to get behind the continent's priorities. So again, another effort to really align and support and work together in the implementation of CADP 3, as it's going to be known, the Kampala Declaration.
And when you think more broadly about the policy work that you do, how do the SDGs provide a role to bring into that? So what role do they play in thinking about policy work?
The SDGs it's a comprehensive set of goals. They show the interconnection between issues. There's no surprise why poverty and hunger, goals 1 and 2, because they underpin all the progress. You can't have progress in other areas as long as you've got a significant portion of the world's population experiencing poverty and hunger. But to address poverty and hunger, you need to improve diets, you need education, you need health systems that work, you need water security. women's empowerment, gender equity. And so all of these things, you need the rule of law. Governance is really critical. You need to ensure a sustainable environment. You need natural resources. You need a climate that is predictable so that you can plan around it. So all of these things are really interconnected, and the SDGs allow for that thinking and potentially even leveraging different sectors to be able to deliver in certain areas. So, for example, we think too much in silos. We're trained to do that in many ways. And thankfully, I think there's a massive recognition that we need, and I think the SDGs contribute to that, that we need to think across sectors, spaces, and disciplines. So in the 5 years left, how do we leverage existing platforms to better deliver? So, for example, I said earlier that food systems could be part of a solution to the climate crisis. We need to be thinking in those ways and taking advantage of investments we make in addressing the climate crisis to also improve food systems. When we're investing in food systems, we should be making sure that we're lifting smallholder farmers out of poverty and improving healthy diets so that we're improving health outcomes. All of these things are interconnected. There are lots of opportunities to have multiple wins if we're strategic in the way we're using our resources and aligning. It's not easy because different sectors, different disciplines use different language, metrics, and there's a lot we have to learn from each other and to understand where we can have impact. But there's a lot of potential if we are thinking about how every dollar we invest can have multiple benefits across the SDGs.
And so, with all the experience that you've had across different organizations and international bodies, what have you seen the most effective in bringing different stakeholders together to really change in a meaningful way?
I think the one that I've had the most experience of is the Scaling Up Nutrition movement. I was part of the civil society network. I was there at the inception. And the idea behind the Sun movement was really, how do you bring different stakeholders to work together on a challenge that was recognized is multi-sectoral in nature, requires a shift in behavior and a shift in the way we work across many stakeholders. And so the networks of Sun bring these different perspectives together. They work together at the global level as well as at the country level, and can foster greater dialogue and understanding across different stakeholders to be able to deliver on nutrition, which is complex to do, but also fairly straightforward if we have alignment across different sectors and different sets of stakeholders. I mean, I think with nutrition, we've had a much greater impact in terms of the understanding of why nutrition is important, because we all came together around the evidence and through the Sun movement to really elevate nutrition as a priority. I think it's experiencing the same challenges as with the poly crises. There's been a lot of competition for resources. And so I think that's an area, again, where we need to have renewed commitment across stakeholders to work together. And we have at least the infrastructure there through the Sun movement.
I think the Sun movement is a great example of that. And we did an episode with the coordinator, Afshan, so that people might like to check that out as well. To close things out, one of the things we often ask is a bit of a recurring question. And we're obviously talking in a broad sense around food. And so we always like to ask people, what's something that you're actually loving to eat at the moment, Asma? You're in winter, so it's hard for you.
I'm going back to my roots. I would say one of my favorite things to eat is dal, which is a comfort food in many ways. Am I limited to one?
No, you can go more than one.
You eat multiple things together. And My mother makes this amazing traditional Hyderabadi dish called mirchi ka salan. That is absolutely my favorite. It's basically a peanut-based curry that has as its main ingredient chili peppers, so jalapenos or any sort of chili pepper. So my mother uses jalapenos, and that is a little bit of dal and a little bit of mirchi ka salan hits the spot.
Amazing. And often, I mean, these food ties back to our roots, to our memories, to moments. And so it's great hearing a little bit about what that invokes, I guess, when you're eating it. And it brings us lots of comfort and joy. Thank you so much for joining us on the show, Asma. It's been a pleasure to talk to you, and we're looking forward to a big year of advocacy in 2025. And thank you for all of your leadership in helping organize some of the priorities and the ways of thinking, and really appreciate it.
Thank you so much, Paul.
You've been listening to Future Fork, a show that explores the world of food and the decisions we can make today that will shape our future. Future Fork is produced by Disruptive Consulting Solutions and supports the SDG2 Advocacy Hub. For more info, head to the website futureforkpodcast.com. This show was produced with strategy and production support from Wavelength Creative. So you don't miss an episode of Future Fork, make sure to subscribe to or follow the show in your podcast app. And while you're there, leave us a 5-star review. It really helps others find the show. I'm Paul Newnham, and I'll see you in the next episode.